Elijah's hand trembled as the phone call ended. The air felt heavy, as though it was closing in on him. His mind was racing, heart pounding. He could feel it in his chest. The conversation he had just overheard in the shop had set something off deep inside him, an instinct he didn't even know was there. The words of the two women, lost twin girls, were still echoing in his head, each word a sharp sting that wouldn't fade. Without a second thought, he stormed out of the auto shop, his boots hitting the cracked pavement in a rhythmic urgency. The last thing he expected today was a random twist of fate that would change everything. But here he was, face to face with a nightmare. Two girls, too familiar, but not his. Twins, sitting alone on the swing set at a nearby park. "Hey," he called out, his voice shaky despite his attempt to sound calm. The girls looked up, their faces pale, their eyes wide with uncertainty. We're looking for our mommy," the girl on the left said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elijah's heart clenched, the words cutting through him like a knife. He wanted to say something, anything, but his mouth was dry. "I'll help you find her," he said, stepping closer, crouching down to meet their eyes. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. He couldn't walk away. Not now, not when they needed him. But as he looked at the twins, something gnawed at him. He had no idea who they were, no idea how he'd found himself in this situation, and no idea where their mother was. But he couldn't ignore the fierce protectiveness that surged within him, just like when he thought of his own daughters, Jolie and Ruby. His mind scrambled for answers, his feet moving before his brain could catch up. Where did he even start? The thought of searching for a stranger's family, two missing girls, seemed insane. But here he was, deep in this mess with no way out. Minutes felt like hours as Elijah called every number he could find, hoping for a lead. But each phone call ended with the same thing, nothing. His frustration grew. Was he even helping? He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, like he was being pulled into a game far bigger than him. And just as his hope started to flicker out, his phone rang. It was a private number. "Mr. Brooks," a woman's voice said, smooth and calm, but with an undercurrent of something Elijah couldn't quite place. "I'm Cassandra Winters. I believe you have my daughters. Hey, I'm really glad you're here. Be honest, have you eaten today? What did you have? Tell me that. Your location and the time. And if you're new, don't leave without subscribing. It feels empty when you come in and leave without saying a word." Elijah's stomach dropped. He wasn't prepared for this, not at all. The words Cassandra Winters hung in the air like an echo, and his mind tried to connect the dots. This wasn't just any mother. Cassandra Winters was a name he'd heard before. A woman with wealth, power, and a dangerous past, according to rumors. "What's going on?" Elijah asked, the words coming out harsher than he intended. He needed answers, needed to understand. "I'm coming to get them," Cassandra said, her voice unshaken. "Meet me at my place. We need to talk." And just like that, his life was on a collision course with something much bigger than he'd ever imagined. The line went dead. Elijah stood frozen, staring at the phone, the weight of the moment sinking in. Who was this woman really, and what was he walking into? Elijah slammed the door of his truck shut, his hands shaking as he pulled away from the curb. The phone call still echoed in his mind. Cassandra Winters. He could feel the weight of the name, like it was a warning he had ignored. He'd known for years how dangerous it was to get involved with people like her, people with power, people who had connections that went beyond what he could understand. But here he was, driving toward the mansion of a woman who was supposed to be the mother of the twin girls he'd just met. The knot in his stomach grew tighter with every mile he drove. The evening air had a chill, but Elijah barely noticed. His focus was consumed with the phone call, his mind bouncing between worry for the girls and the dread of meeting Cassandra. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he knew he couldn't back out now. The girls needed him. They had trusted him, and he had promised to help. As he neared the mansion, his nerves only heightened. The houses grew larger, more extravagant, and the streets more empty. He could see the towering gates ahead, the high stone walls, and the massive windows, gleaming with cold precision. This was not a world he belonged to. The gates slowly opened, almost as if they knew him, and Elijah drove through, parking just outside the massive front door. His hands gripped the steering wheel as he stared at the house. It looked like something out of a movie, a place for the rich and untouchable. It didn't make sense that two little girls could be caught up in this world. Is this really what I'm getting myself into? Elijah muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. He couldn't even remember the last time he'd been this uncertain. He grabbed his phone, his thumb hovering over the call button, but then stopped himself. No going back. It was time to face whatever lay ahead. Elijah climbed out of the truck, the gravel crunching under his boots. The night was eerily quiet. No cars passed, no people. Just the sound of his own breath, steady but shallow as he made his way to the front door. His hand hovered over the doorbell, but something about this moment felt too still, too quiet, like he was being watched. He wasn't the type to believe in conspiracies, but the reality of the situation, helping a stranger's kids, meeting someone with this much wealth and influence, felt wrong. And yet, he was here. The door swung open before he could ring. A tall woman, in an all-black suit, stood in front of him, her eyes cold and calculating. There was no warmth in her smile, just a sharp recognition as if she knew him better than he knew himself. "You must be Elijah," she said, her voice smooth but distant. He nodded, words failing him for a moment. "And you must be Cassandra," he replied, his voice low. "Yes, come in," she said, stepping aside to let him in. As he crossed the threshold, he couldn't help but feel like he had just walked into a trap, a game he wasn't ready to play. As he stepped inside, the grandiose walls of the mansion loomed around him. There was no turning back now. Would he be able to help the girls, or had he just stepped into something much darker than he ever imagined? The door clicked shut behind Elijah, its echo amplifying in the cavernous entryway. The sharp scent of fresh leather and polished wood filled his senses as he stepped further into the mansion. His eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, and the luxury around him was almost suffocating. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. Cassandra didn't wait for Elijah to get comfortable. She led him through a wide hallway adorned with expensive art pieces and family portraits. The heavy silence between them seemed to stretch, each step feeling like an eternity. The only sound was the clicking of their shoes against the marble floors, and Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that he was being led into a trap he didn't fully understand. "You can sit here," Cassandra said, motioning toward a sleek, modern sofa that sat facing a large fireplace. "I'll have tea sent up in a moment." Her tone was cordial, but distant. Elijah hesitated before sitting down, his mind racing. He wasn't sure if he should speak first or let Cassandra take the lead. The whole situation felt off. He hadn't expected to find himself in the middle of this world of wealth and power. He was a mechanic, for crying out loud, a single dad just trying to keep it together. But here he was, surrounded by more money than he could ever dream of. Cassandra sat across from him, her eyes scanning him, not with warmth, but with the calculating look of someone who had been through too much. She didn't offer small talk. Instead, she cut straight to the point. "I know you're confused, Elijah," she said, her voice steady, almost soothing. "But I need you to listen carefully. My daughters, they've been in danger, and so have I. What you're about to hear is something I've kept from the world for years." She paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "I wasn't always a billionaire," Cassandra said, her eyes narrowing as she looked past him, as if seeing something distant. "I come from humble beginnings, just like you. But the price of my success came at the cost of my family's safety." Her eyes flicked to him, piercing through the dim light. "The moment I stepped into this world, everything I knew, everything I loved, became a target." Elijah felt his stomach twist. This wasn't just some random story. This wasn't just about some rich woman looking for her daughters. Cassandra wasn't just asking for help. She was warning him. "You have to understand, Elijah," she continued, her voice quiet now. "This is bigger than us. I didn't want my daughters to live in fear, but they have been dragged into this world, and now so have you." Elijah's head was spinning. He could barely grasp what she was saying, but he knew one thing for sure. His life had just taken a turn he wasn't ready for. He wasn't prepared for this level of danger. He wasn't prepared to be part of this world. But there was no going back. He had made a promise to the girls, and now he was about to get pulled deeper into a fight that wasn't his own. "Why are you telling me this now?" Elijah asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, and his throat was dry. He wasn't sure if he wanted the answer. "Because I need your help." Cassandra replied, her gaze steady. The people after us won't stop until they have what they want. And they will use anyone to get it, especially you. Elijah's heart skipped a beat. The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy blanket. He wasn't just helping a mother find her daughters. He was stepping into a battle that was far bigger than he could have ever imagined. Elijah felt the room close in around him. What had he gotten himself into? He hadn't signed up for this. He hadn't asked for a world of billionaires and dangerous secrets, but there was no turning back now. Would he be able to protect the twins from the danger Cassandra warned him about? Or had he just made the biggest mistake of his life? Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a second of this story. What do you think Elijah should do now? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let's inspire others to keep fighting for what's right. The air felt thick as Cassandra led Elijah through the maze of hallways, the soft click of her heels on the marble floors echoing like distant warnings. The mansion stretched endlessly, each room larger than the last, decorated with things that seemed so out of place for someone like Elijah. He had spent most of his life in small, cramped spaces, places that smelled like work, sweat, and effort. This house, this fortress, smelled like money, and it felt like it was closing in on him. They arrived in a living room so grand that Elijah felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the perfectly manicured gardens, and the modern furniture was arranged in a way that made him feel even more out of place. It was all cold, sterile. No sign of a family who lived here, just wealth. So much wealth. Cassandra motioned for him to sit on the plush leather sofa, her movements precise and controlled. She didn't sit immediately, instead walking toward the bar and pouring herself a glass of something dark. Elijah remained standing, unsure if he should take a seat, but too proud to ask for permission. "Sit, Elijah," she said, the command in her voice unmistakable. Elijah hesitated, then finally lowered himself onto the couch, the softness of the cushions swallowing him up. It felt wrong to be here in this place where everything was polished, perfect, too perfect. Cassandra took a slow sip of her drink before turning to him, her gaze sharp and calculating. "I know you have questions," she said, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. "But you need to understand, Elijah. Everything in this house, in my life, is built on lies and secrets. My wealth, my business empire, it's all been a means to an end. And that end, Elijah, is about protecting my family." She paused, as if weighing the impact of her next words. Your life, your children's lives, have just become part of that protection. Elijah's breath hitched. His life? What did she mean by that? He was just trying to do the right thing, help the girls. This wasn't supposed to be his fight. He had no place here, not with someone like Cassandra Winters. And yet somehow, his world had just collided with hers. "What are you talking about?" Elijah finally found his voice, the question sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. "How am I part of this?" She didn't answer right away, instead setting her drink down on the marble table in front of her, and then, with a slow exhale, she spoke. "I'm not just a billionaire, Elijah. I'm a target. And the people who want to take me down, they'll stop at nothing. They'll use anyone they can, anyone close to me. That includes you." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Elijah's mind raced. He had a daughter. He had his own family to protect. The last thing he needed was to be dragged into something like this. "Why would they want me?" Elijah's voice was hoarse now, his mind trying to make sense of the chaos. "I'm just a mechanic, a single dad. What do I have to do with any of this?" Cassandra's eyes softened, but only for a moment. "You're the one helping the girls," she said, her voice quieter now. "And that makes you a target. They won't let you walk away from this unscathed." Elijah's heart began to race, his palms sweating. This wasn't just about finding two missing girls. This was about something much, much bigger. He didn't know what it was, but he could feel the danger in the air. It was suffocating, closing in on him. The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity. Elijah's thoughts were spinning, his chest tight with anxiety. He never asked for this. He didn't want to be involved in a billionaire's dangerous game. He just wanted to help the girls, to make sure they weren't alone in this world. But now he was in too deep. Cassandra's gaze never left him, like she was sizing him up, trying to decide how much he could handle. "I know this is overwhelming," she said finally. But there's more to this than you think, and we don't have much time. You're not just helping me. You're helping the twins survive." Elijah leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "What do you mean? You want me to get involved in your fight?" Cassandra's expression hardened. "It's not my fight. It's theirs. The twins are the key to everything." The words hung in the air, thick with tension. But Elijah didn't understand. What did the twins have to do with all of this? Cassandra leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have no idea what you're about to get involved in, Elijah. But the moment you walked in here, your life changed forever, and now you're part of a game that you may never escape from." Elijah stood frozen in place, the weight of Cassandra's words sinking in like lead. Every part of him screamed to walk out, to leave the mansion and never look back. He had enough problems of his own, being a single father, working long hours just to keep the lights on. And now, he was tangled in a web of high-stakes danger that he never asked for. But as the silence stretched, the weight of the two girls, Madeline and Lily, kept him rooted to the spot. "You're telling me I'm in danger because I'm helping you?" Elijah asked, his voice strained, trying to make sense of it all. Cassandra nodded slowly, her eyes focused on him with a mixture of urgency and something else, regret perhaps. "Not just you," she corrected him. "Anyone close to me. And that includes the girls. They've been living in hiding for years, and it's only a matter of time before the people who are after us catch up." Elijah ran a hand through his hair, the gravity of her words settling in his gut. He wasn't some kind of hero. He was a father, a man just trying to get by. How had he found himself in the middle of this nightmare? "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. He wanted to be angry, wanted to turn around and walk out the door. But the image of the twins, so small, so vulnerable, kept him from taking a step back. They didn't deserve any of this. Cassandra seemed to sense his hesitation, her gaze softening just a fraction. "I know this is a lot to ask," she said quietly, her voice less like the Ice Queen he'd first met and more like a mother pleading for help. "But I can't do this alone. I need someone who will fight for them, for their future." Elijah swallowed hard. The thought of getting involved in something so dangerous, something so far beyond his control, made his chest tighten. But something inside him clicked. He wasn't the kind of man to turn his back when someone, especially kids, needed him. "Fine," he said, surprising himself with his own resolve. "But this isn't some simple rescue mission. I'm not going to just march in and start taking down bad guys. If I'm in, we do this my way." Cassandra's lips twitched into a brief smile. "Deal." Just like that, an unlikely alliance had been formed. But as Elijah took a seat across from her, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he was in way over his head. This wasn't a fight he'd signed up for, and he wasn't sure he had what it took to win. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going down without a fight. "Hey, I'm really glad you're here. Be honest, have you eaten today? What did you have? Tell me that, your location and the time, and if you're new, don't leave without subscribing. It feels empty when you come in and leave without saying a word." As they sat in the grand living room, the tension between them seemed to shift slightly, but Elijah's mind was still spinning. This wasn't a world he was familiar with, but he had made his choice. "So, what now?" Elijah asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his mind. "What's our first step?" Cassandra met his gaze, her expression hardening once more. "We find out who's behind all this," she said, her voice full of cold determination, "and we take them down." The words hung in the air, heavy with the promise of what was to come. This was no longer about helping two little girls. This was about survival. Elijah didn't know if he was ready for what Cassandra was asking of him. But one thing was clear. The moment he agreed to this, there was no going back. What had started as a simple act of kindness had turned into something much more dangerous. Could he keep the girls safe, or would he find himself lost in a fight he couldn't win? Stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what comes next in this thrilling journey. What do you think Elijah should do next? Let's talk about it in the comments and inspire others with our thoughts. Elijah sat back, his mind racing. Cassandra's words kept echoing in his head, each one heavier than the last. "We take them down." He wasn't ready for that. He wasn't built for taking down dangerous people. He was just a dad, a mechanic who had spent most of his life trying to fix broken things, not fight against people who could ruin everything. But he'd made his choice. And no matter how big this fight was, it was too late to turn back. The girls, Madeline and Lily, had already become a part of his life, and as long as they were endangered, there was no way he could stand by and do nothing. "You're not like the rest of them, Elijah," Cassandra said, breaking his thoughts. "That's why I chose you. I can't trust just anyone to protect them." He looked up, meeting her eyes. There was something raw, almost desperate, behind her usual coldness. It was fleeting, but it was there. The facade of the billionaire, the confident, untouchable woman who ran empires, beneath all of that, she was just a mother trying to keep her children safe. "I don't know if you're making a mistake," Elijah said quietly, his voice low. He could feel the weight of the words before he said them. "I've never done anything like this before. I don't know who I'm up against." Cassandra sighed, running her fingers through her hair. She leaned back in her chair. "It's not just about you, Elijah. It's about them." She paused, her face hardening. "The people after me, after us, they've been hunting for my daughters for years. They know about the girls. They know about me." Elijah leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean? Who are these people?" Cassandra took a deep breath, her gaze distant, like she was reliving something that had haunted her for too long. "They're not just random criminals, Elijah. They're part of a much bigger organization, a network of people I've had to deal with since I first started building my empire. I thought I could protect them, keep them hidden, but now, they've found us." She looked back at him, her eyes hardening. "And I'm not about to let them take my children." Elijah's chest tightened. The stakes were higher than he'd imagined. This wasn't just about protecting two little girls anymore. It was about taking down an organization that could destroy everything Cassandra had worked for, and everything he held dear. Cassandra's words hit Elijah like a freight train. He didn't know what to make of this world she was dragging him into. His hands were shaking, his heart racing, as he processed everything she had just revealed. She wasn't just a rich woman looking for her daughters. She was a mother fighting for their lives against an unseen enemy, and now he was part of that fight, whether he liked it or not. "I don't know what I'm walking into," Elijah said, the words sounding hollow even to him. He stood up, walking over to the window, his hands resting on the cool glass. The mansion stretched out below him, the sprawling lawns and beautiful gardens, masking the danger lurking in the shadows. "You don't need to," Cassandra said, her voice quieter now. "You just need to trust me. The moment I called you, I knew you were the right person. I need you to protect them, and to protect yourself." Elijah turned to look at her, her words sinking in deeper. It wasn't just about the girls anymore. It was about survival. Survival against forces he didn't understand. And just as he thought he had a handle on things, a soft ping came from his phone. His heart skipped a beat as he read the message. "We know where you are. We're coming for them." The message was short, but it felt like a punch to the gut. Elijah felt the room close in around him, his chest tightening. They weren't just watching Cassandra. They were watching him too. He looked up at Cassandra, his mind spinning. "They know we're here." Cassandra stood up, her eyes blazing with fury. "Then we don't have much time." The walls of the mansion seemed to close in as Elijah read the chilling message over and over again. "We know where you are. We're coming for them." His heart raced, adrenaline surging through him like a flood. He looked at Cassandra, whose face had gone pale, but her expression was cold, calculated, like she had been expecting this all along. "Get up," she ordered, moving quickly toward the door. "We don't have much time." Elijah didn't need to be told twice. His legs moved before his brain could catch up. He followed her through the dark hallways, every step echoing in the silence that had descended on the mansion. The luxury, the vastness of the space, suddenly felt like a trap. Every corner seemed like it could hold danger, and Elijah's mind raced. They knew where they were. Who were they? And what did they want? Cassandra led him to a narrow hallway near the back of the house. The sound of distant voices reached them, too calm, too rehearsed. He could hear muffled footsteps, like someone was moving through the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "They've been watching us," Cassandra said, barely above a whisper. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. "They know everything about me, about my family. They knew we'd come here." A cold shiver ran down Elijah's spine. This wasn't some random threat. These were people who had been tracking Cassandra, and now they had found him. He was in this far deeper than he ever wanted to be. Cassandra reached a door at the end of the hallway and motioned for Elijah to follow. "In here," she whispered urgently, pulling him into a small, windowless room. She shut the door behind them and locked it. For a brief moment, there was only the sound of their heavy breathing. Then came the pounding. A series of knocks echoed from the other side of the house, frantic but rhythmic. It was the sound of someone trying to break in. Elijah's heart thudded in his chest and his throat felt tight. "They're here," Cassandra said, her voice steady, "and they'll stop at nothing to get what they want." Elijah turned to her, his mind racing. "What do they want with you? Why is this happening?" Cassandra's gaze hardened. "It's not just about me. It's about everything I've built. And now it's about the girls. If they find them, they'll use them as leverage to take everything I've worked for, everything we've fought for." Elijah swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. This was no longer just about protecting the girls. It was about taking down the people who would stop at nothing to destroy them. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the house, followed by frantic shouts. Elijah's heart skipped a beat. He felt the adrenaline flooding his veins. The clock was ticking and the fight was about to begin. Cassandra's eyes were cold, calculating. She seemed almost prepared for this. Elijah's stomach turned. It was clear she had been waiting for this moment to come. But he hadn't. "They're coming for us, Elijah," she said. "But we won't go down without a fight." Elijah looked at her, the gravity of the situation dawning on him. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, if anyone could be ready for this kind of danger. But he had no choice. He had already made a promise to protect these girls, and now that promise meant everything. He could hear the footsteps getting closer, the sound of doors breaking open, and he didn't know how much longer they had. The clock was ticking, and they had no time to waste. Suddenly, the door to the room creaked, and Elijah froze. The sound of footsteps was growing louder. Were they too late? Were the enemies already at their door? The door creaked, sending a chill down Elijah's spine. He froze, his body tense, every muscle screaming for him to run. But where could he go? The walls were closing in. The footsteps outside the room had stopped, but the silence felt worse than any noise could. It was the kind of quiet that made your skin crawl, the kind that came right before a storm. "Get ready," Cassandra whispered, her voice barely audible. She moved to the corner of the room and pulled a small bag from beneath the desk. It was heavy with whatever tools she was planning to use. Elijah didn't ask questions. He had no time to. He tried to steady his breath, forcing his heart to slow down. He was terrified, but he couldn't let it show. He had to focus. The twins depended on him. This was no longer just about Cassandra. It was about the two girls who had no one else. The door flung open without warning. Two men stepped into the room, their presence looming like a bad omen. Both were wearing dark suits, their faces cold and expressionless. Elijah could feel the weight of their gaze on him, sizing him up. Cassandra didn't flinch. She stood tall, eyes locked on the intruders. "I'm guessing you're not here for tea," she said, her voice sharp, every word dripping with authority. The men didn't respond. One of them moved toward her, his hand brushing the gun at his side. Before Elijah could react, Cassandra stepped forward, her eyes flashing. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice low but commanding. "You know better than that." The man hesitated. The tension in the room thickened. Elijah was still trying to piece together everything that was happening. Who were these men? What did they want with Cassandra? And why was he suddenly a target too? One of the men turned his attention to Elijah, his eyes narrowing. "You're in the way, buddy. Step aside and this won't have to get ugly." Elijah didn't move. He couldn't. Something deep within him, that protective instinct, told him to stand his ground. He wasn't just going to let them waltz in and take over. The girls needed him. "Move, Elijah," Cassandra said softly, her voice a warning. She was the one in control here, not him. He nodded and stepped back, but his mind was racing. There had to be a way out of this. As if reading his thoughts, Cassandra's gaze met his, a silent communication between them. He understood then. This wasn't just about survival. It was about outsmarting them. These men weren't expecting her to fight back, and Cassandra had plans. Suddenly, a sharp click echoed through the room. One of the men turned toward the sound, his eyes widening in recognition. "Get down!" he shouted. But it was too late. The lights flickered, and the room exploded into chaos. The men stumbled back, their hands reaching for their guns, but it was already over. Cassandra had moved with the precision of someone who'd been through this too many times before. She had been ready. Elijah's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the men retreat, cursing under their breath. But they were too late. They had underestimated Cassandra, and now they were going to regret it. "Hey, I'm really glad you're here. Be honest. Have you eaten today? What did you have? Tell me that. Your location and the time. And if you're new, don't leave without subscribing. It feels empty when you come in and leave without saying a word." The room fell eerily silent again. Elijah felt his breath return to normal, his chest still heaving with the adrenaline of the moment. He looked over at Cassandra, who was already moving toward the door. She wasn't done. "Get ready," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "This is just the beginning." Elijah didn't know if he was ready for what was coming next, but there was no turning back now. He had stepped into this world, and it wasn't going to let him go that easily. Just as they were about to leave the room, a loud bang echoed from the hallway. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Were more of them coming? How far would this go? The echo of the gunshot still rang in Elijah's ears as he followed Cassandra down the hallway. Every step felt heavier than the last, the tension in the air thick, almost suffocating. The sound of footsteps was growing louder, more of them, coming from the hallway they had just escaped. Elijah's mind raced, calculating their next move, but Cassandra didn't flinch. She moved with the same confidence, the same quiet authority that had carried her through every moment of danger so far. "This is the moment," she said, glancing over her shoulder at Elijah. "They're not going to stop. They never do. But they're about to learn the hard way that they're not dealing with someone who'll roll over." Elijah nodded, trying to steel himself. He had never been in a situation like this. No amount of preparation could have readied him for the violence, the chaos, the weight of responsibility that he felt pressing down on him. But there was no turning back now. Suddenly, Cassandra stopped, turning to face Elijah. "You're not just helping me, Elijah," she said, her voice softer now, but still filled with urgency. "This fight is bigger than you or me. It's about them, my girls. And it's about standing up against the people who think they can take whatever they want without consequences." Elijah could see the fire in her eyes. She wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for everything she had built and for the future of her daughters. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making sure they had a future, that they could live in a world where people like the ones after them didn't get to call the shots. "We take them down," Cassandra continued, the edge in her voice returning. "We make sure they understand that you don't mess with me and you don't mess with my family." Elijah took a deep breath. It was the first time he felt like they might actually have a chance at winning this fight. He was just a mechanic, a single dad who had stumbled into something that had already been set into motion long before he had met Cassandra. But now it was clear. He had a role to play, a part to take in this fight, and he wasn't going to back down. The footsteps in the hallway stopped, but the silence that followed was deafening. The next move was theirs to make. Cassandra turned back toward the hallway, her expression set. "Let's finish this," she muttered under her breath. "They want to play? Fine, let's play." Elijah followed her, his heart racing. Every second counted now. Every decision had weight. They weren't just running from danger anymore. They were taking the fight to them. They reached the front door just as more footsteps approached from the other side. Cassandra looked at Elijah one last time, her eyes fierce. "Ready?" Elijah swallowed, his voice steady. "Let's do this." And with that, they opened the door, stepping into the unknown. Before they could react, the door swung open with a force that nearly knocked them off their feet. Standing in the doorway was a figure Elijah recognized, a familiar face that stopped him dead in his tracks. Was this the ally they'd been waiting for, or was it another enemy in disguise? Elijah's heart slammed in his chest as the door swung wide, revealing the figure standing there. His breath caught in his throat. The face was familiar, one he had hoped to never see again. "Derek?" Elijah's voice was barely a whisper, the shock stealing his words. He stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the man who had been a part of the tangled web he had walked into Derek. The man who had been nothing but trouble in Cassandra's life now stood before him, an unsettling smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "Did you really think you could escape me, Cassandra?" Derek's voice was laced with arrogance. He stepped forward, his broad frame blocking the hallway. "You don't get to run from your past, and you certainly don't get to hide your little toys here." Elijah felt a rush of anger pulse through him, but he fought to keep his cool. This wasn't about him and Derek. It was about the girls. It was about protecting Cassandra's family, and that's what mattered. He stepped forward, keeping his body between Derek and Cassandra. "You don't have the right to do this," Elijah said, his voice steady, though his insides were anything but calm. "This isn't your fight." Derek's eyes shifted to Elijah, sizing him up. "Isn't it? You're in deeper than you think, mechanic," he sneered. "You don't belong here, and neither does she." But Cassandra wasn't having it. She stepped forward, her posture no longer that of a woman cornered, but a lioness ready to fight for her cubs. "You don't get to control this, Derek. You never did," she said, her voice hard, unwavering. "This ends now." Elijah wasn't sure if he was ready for the storm that was about to hit. But there was no backing down. He stood beside Cassandra, his stance firm. He didn't know who Derek's allies were or what kind of power he had, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let this man take anything from them. Derek's smirk faltered as he took a step back, glancing around, eyes narrowing. He knew they weren't alone anymore. And even if he didn't know all the details of the past few days, he knew that Cassandra Winters had allies, and it seemed he had underestimated Elijah. "You think you've won, but you've just made things harder," Derek said, his voice cold, almost threatening. "This isn't over. It's just beginning." With those words, Derek turned and walked out, leaving Elijah and Cassandra standing in the doorway. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Elijah exhaled slowly, the tension in his body loosening just slightly. He had no idea what was coming next, but he could feel the weight of the battle still hanging in the air. "Is it really over?" Elijah asked, his voice filled with doubt. Cassandra turned to him, her eyes calm, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. "No," she said softly, "but we've taken the first step, and that's all that matters." Elijah didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to question her, to ask her what the next step was, how they would stop Derek and the others from coming after them. But right now, and all he could think about was the twins, Madeline and Lily, and the promise he'd made to them. He wasn't backing down. Cassandra's expression softened, but there was no mistaking the resolve in her eyes. "We'll keep moving forward. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and Derek and his people won't stop until they get what they want. But we'll make sure they never get it." Elijah nodded, his resolve strengthening with every word she said. He had already come this far, and there was no turning back now. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their future, for the future of the girls. As they stepped out of the doorway, Cassandra turned to Elijah. "You're more than just a mechanic, Elijah. You're part of this now, and I'm not letting anyone hurt you or those girls, not now, not ever." Elijah glanced at her, a flicker of something between admiration and fear in his eyes. This wasn't the life he had ever imagined, but it was the life he had chosen, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. Suddenly, Cassandra's phone rang, breaking the silence. She glanced at the screen, her face hardening once again. "It's them," she said quietly, the words sending a chill through Elijah. "They're coming, and this time we're not waiting for them to make the first move. Things are about to escalate. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always in the loop." What do you think Cassandra and Elijah should do next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going and inspire others to stand strong. The phone's incessant ringing cut through the tense silence in the room. Elijah could see Cassandra's fingers hesitate over the screen, her expression hardening like stone. Her gaze flickered to him, sharp and calculating, before she answered the call. "Yes." Her voice was steady, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear, perhaps, or maybe just the weight of what was to come. Elijah watched her, his heart racing, the realization sinking in. This wasn't just a conversation. This was the beginning of the end. "This better be important," Cassandra said, Her tone clipped. Elijah couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but Cassandra's face told him everything, her jaw clenched, her eyes narrowing as the conversation unfolded. The words she exchanged were short, curt, businesslike, but Elijah knew enough to see the tension building. The room around them seemed to grow smaller, the air thicker. As the call ended, Cassandra set her phone down with a soft click. She didn't look at Elijah immediately. Her eyes were distant, fixed on the space beyond him, calculating, perhaps wondering how to move forward. "They've found us," she said finally, her voice lower than before. It was a statement, not a question. "And they're coming faster than I thought." Elijah felt his stomach drop. It was happening. Everything that Cassandra had warned him about, the shadowy figures, the danger lurking in every corner, was finally here, and now they were trapped. "We don't have time to waste," Cassandra continued, walking toward the window. The mansion sprawled out beneath them, beautiful and peaceful, but Elijah could see the darkness creeping in at the edges, the calm before the storm. "So what's the plan?" Elijah asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but the nerves in his stomach were growing. Cassandra turned to face him, her eyes sharp. "We fight, but this time, we do it my way." She crossed the room, her steps confident, her face set in determination. "I've been running long enough. It's time to take back control." She paused, locking eyes with Elijah. "Are you ready for this?" Elijah's breath hitched. He had no idea what he was getting into, but there was no backing down. Not now. He had already come too far, already made a promise to protect those girls. He wasn't going to let them down. "I'm ready," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. Cassandra's lips twitched into a fleeting smile, almost imperceptible. "Good," she said, moving to a nearby cabinet and pulling out a hidden drawer. "Then we do this." She pulled out a stack of papers, photographs, and a few small, discreet devices Elijah didn't recognize. This wasn't just about survival. It was a game of power, of strategy, and Cassandra Winters wasn't playing for second place. She laid the papers on the table between them. "These are their moves," she said. "Every step they've taken. We know what they want, and now we take control." Elijah stared at the map of their enemy's plans, but it was clear that they were no longer playing defense. Cassandra had already planned their counterattack. The tension in the room was almost unbearable as Cassandra laid out their next steps. Elijah's heart was hammering, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the adrenaline, the sense that they were about to take the fight to their enemies. "We hit them where it hurts," Cassandra said, her voice fierce with purpose. "We expose everything they've done, make them pay for what they've tried to do to my family, and once they know we're not backing down, we finish this." Elijah wasn't sure he was ready for the level of danger this would bring, but he knew there was no turning back. The fight was no longer just about protecting the twins. It was about justice, about making sure they never had to live in fear again. Just as they started planning their next move, Elijah heard a distant sound, the faint hum of a car engine, followed by the screeching of tires. Something wasn't right. They were already here. The tension in the room grew thick, like the air before a thunderstorm. Elijah's heart hammered in his chest as he stared at the plans laid out before him. Cassandra's strategy was meticulous. No stone unturned, no angle left unexplored. This wasn't just about the girls anymore. This was about taking down an empire of corruption, of lies and deceit. The stakes had escalated beyond what Elijah ever thought was possible, and now there was no turning back. "Everything they've done is right here," Cassandra said, tapping a photograph of a man Elijah didn't recognize. "This is Gregory Malinov, one of the key players. He's been involved in everything, from the corporate fraud to the threats against my family." Elijah looked at the photo. The man was tall, dark-haired, with a face that screamed authority, power, and danger. A man who didn't hesitate to destroy anyone in his path. He could tell by the coldness in Cassandra's voice that she knew exactly who Malinov was, and she was prepared to make him pay. Cassandra moved to the next paper, her fingers brushing across the top of it. "We have to hit them where it hurts the most," she said, her tone steely. "Not just expose their crimes, but cripple their operations. We destroy everything they've built, and then we take the girls out of this mess once and for all." Elijah nodded slowly, but the weight of what she was asking settled in his chest like a lead balloon. "This is a lot," he muttered. We're talking about taking down a whole organization. I don't know if we can do that. Cassandra's eyes never left him. You'll see. They've made a mistake. They think they have the upper hand, but they don't know me. They don't know who they're dealing with. Elijah swallowed hard, his throat dry as he looked at the plans. This was all happening too fast, too suddenly. But in that moment, he knew there was no way out. Not for him and not for Cassandra. They were in this together, and whatever happened, they had to make it work. The sharp sound of a door slamming downstairs snapped him out of his thoughts. He stiffened, glancing quickly at Cassandra, whose eyes had already narrowed in recognition. "They're here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Get ready." The faint hum of car engines that had been growing louder in the distance now seemed to fill every corner of the mansion. The footsteps downstairs grew louder, too many of them. Cassandra didn't flinch. She was ready. "Now we see if your plan works," Elijah said, the words heavy on his tongue. He felt a jolt of uncertainty run through him, but he didn't let it show. He had to stay strong. The twins were depending on him. They were all depending on him. Cassandra's lips curled into a tight smile, but it wasn't one of joy. It was one of cold determination. "This is our fight now, Elijah. We take them down. We don't wait for them to come for us." She moved toward the door, her steps quick but measured. Elijah followed her, his hand hovering over the gun she'd handed him earlier, something he never thought he'd need. But here he was, caught in the middle of a battle that was too big for him, and yet somehow it had become his fight. Fight 2. As they reached the door, the sounds outside intensified. The engines were too close now. They were coming. Elijah took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He didn't know what was waiting for him outside that door, what kind of danger they were about to face. But the thought of those two little girls, Madeline and Lily, was all he needed to push forward. Cassandra opened the door slowly, peering out into the hallway. The house was eerily silent now, not a single noise. The moment hung in the air, pregnant with anticipation. Then there it was, a low creak, a sound that didn't belong. Elijah's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" he whispered, his hand tightening around the gun. "Watch and wait," Cassandra said, her voice firm but low. She motioned for him to follow as she moved stealthily down the hallway, her eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. She was always calculating, always 5 steps ahead, and Elijah was starting to understand just how much he had learned to survive in this world of danger and deception. The footsteps got closer. Whoever it was, they were almost at the door. And then, just like that, the silence shattered. The door burst open, and Elijah barely had time to react before a masked figure stepped into the room. His heart raced, adrenaline flooding his veins. Cassandra was ready, but Elijah, he wasn't so sure. The tension in the room was unbearable. The masked figure filled the doorway, his silhouette dark and imposing against the hallway light. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. The man stood still for a moment, eyes hidden behind the mask, but the tension in the air was palpable. Elijah's hand tightened around the gun, his mind racing for a plan, any plan. But all he could think about were the twins. They couldn't get caught up in this. They couldn't lose their future. Cassandra didn't flinch. She was already stepping forward, her eyes cold, calculating. She didn't need to ask who this was. She knew. This was part of the fight, the part that they had been preparing for. Elijah could feel the sweat on his palms, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what came next. His life, his daughter's safety, Cassandra's future, everything depended on the choices they made right now. The masked figure's gloved hand moved slowly, reaching into the bag slung over his shoulder. For a moment, everything felt like it was moving in slow motion, the seconds stretching longer than they should. Elijah could hear his pulse in his ears, the silence growing deafening. Without warning, the figure tossed a small object into the room. "Grenade!" Elijah yelled, instinctively diving toward Cassandra, pulling her to the ground as the object landed with a soft thud. The room erupted in chaos. The sound of glass shattering, the burst of pressure from the explosion. But it wasn't the kind of explosion Elijah had imagined. No flames, no fire, just smoke. Thick, choking smoke that enveloped the room instantly. Elijah could barely see. His throat burned, his eyes watering from the cloud filling the air. He pulled Cassandra closer, trying to shield her, though he knew it was futile. This was no longer about physical safety. It was about surviving the storm. The figure moved faster than Elijah had anticipated. Through the smoke, he saw the man's silhouette shift, coming closer with the sound of soft footsteps. Cassandra pushed against his chest, her voice harsh in his ear. "Move! Elijah, get up!" Elijah's mind raced. Where were the girls? Were they safe? Were they being watched? He felt the weight of the unknown press down on him. But Cassandra had a plan. He had to trust her. He had to move. They rolled to their feet, eyes stinging from the smoke. The air was thick, the taste of metal and ash burning his tongue. His ears were ringing, and for a moment he felt disoriented, fighting not just for air, but for clarity. Cassandra, however, seemed unaffected. Her eyes locked on the masked man, calculating, ready for the next move. She pulled a small device from her pocket and pressed it against the wall. A quiet beep followed, and the next thing Elijah knew, the room flickered with light. Bright, blinding lights. The masked man staggered back, his hands instinctively shielding his eyes. It was over. The smoke cleared, and in that moment, the room seemed to breathe again. "Who the hell are you?" Cassandra's voice rang out, her composure never wavering. She stood tall, not a trace of fear in her eyes, just steely determination. The man took a step forward, his mask now partially removed. "You really think this is over?" His voice was deep, venomous. "You've only just started playing my game." Elijah felt the weight of those words in his chest. This wasn't just a battle. This was a game, and they were the pawns. The masked man's smirk was enough to make Elijah's blood boil. This wasn't going to end easily. They hadn't even scratched the surface yet. Cassandra's voice cut through the tension. "You're too late," she said, her words sharp, final. "We already have everything we need to take you down." The man laughed, a sound that sent chills down Elijah's spine. "You think you can just expose us? There's so much you don't understand. You don't even know who's really pulling the strings." Elijah's pulse quickened. What was he talking about? Who was behind all of this? Cassandra had always been in control, always 3 steps ahead. But now Elijah was beginning to feel like they were running in circles, never quite catching up. Before he could ask another question, the door slammed open again, this time with a loud crash. More footsteps, more men. They were surrounded. Cassandra stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with something Elijah couldn't quite place. "You really think you've won?" she said, her voice deadly calm. "This is just the beginning. I will burn everything to the ground to protect my family, and I'll make sure you pay." The room seemed to close in around Elijah as the sound of boots pounding on the floor grew louder. His heart raced in his chest, but his mind stayed focused. Cassandra was right next to him, her presence a steadying force, but even she couldn't hide the tension in her jaw. The masked man smirked, and behind him, more figures, dressed in black, their faces covered, poured into the room, their silhouettes sharp and ominous in the low light. Elijah had never been in a fight like this before. He had grown up in a world of hard work and modest living. There were no enemies lurking in the shadows, no billion-dollar schemes. This wasn't the world he knew, but it was the world he had been thrust into. And the one thing that kept him moving forward now was the unshakable need to protect those twin girls, to keep Cassandra and her family safe. "Cassandra," Elijah whispered, his voice low. "What now? We can't keep running. They're everywhere." His words hung in the air, thick with disbelief and fear. Her eyes met his, intense and unwavering. "We don't run, Elijah," she replied, her tone fierce. "We stand and fight. This is the moment we take control. If we don't do it now, we may never get another chance." The men in black stepped forward, their eyes cold and calculating, but Cassandra didn't back down. She didn't even blink. With each step they took, Cassandra took another one of her own, closing the space between them, her confidence radiating off of her in waves. "Do you really think I'm afraid of you?" she said, her voice cutting through the tense air. "You're all just puppets in a game you don't even understand." One of the men, a large figure in the front, stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "You don't get to speak to us like that. You'll learn soon enough that this is our world now." Elijah's fists clenched, his knuckles turning white. He wasn't a fighter, but the fire burning in his chest, protecting those girls, keeping Cassandra from falling into the hands of these men, made him feel like he could do anything. He stepped forward, standing beside Cassandra, ready to do whatever it took to end this nightmare. "We're not afraid of you either," Elijah said, his voice steady. It wasn't a challenge, it was a promise. A promise that no matter how many of them were out there, no matter how much they tried to intimidate him, he wouldn't back down. The tension in the room thickened, the air heavy with the weight of the imminent confrontation. Cassandra turned to Elijah, her expression softening ever so slightly. A rare moment of vulnerability in her eyes. "We'll make it through this," she said almost to herself, as if reaffirming her own resolve. Before Elijah could respond, the sound of a gun being cocked echoed through the room. The sudden click of the gun's mechanism sent a jolt through Elijah's body. The men were ready to end this. But Cassandra, she didn't flinch. She was a woman who had fought and survived in a world Elijah barely understood, and now she was about to make her move. "Do it," Cassandra said, her voice cold, defiant. "You'll regret it." The man holding the gun sneered, stepping closer. "You think you have power, Cassandra? You think you can stand up to us?" He raised the gun, his finger hovering over the trigger. But just as he did, the entire room went dark. The sudden blackness was disorienting, but Elijah's instincts kicked in. He grabbed Cassandra's arm, pulling her away from the gunman, pushing her behind him. His heart was pounding, his breath shallow, but he didn't panic. He knew they had one chance, just one chance, to turn this around. The sounds of men scrambling in the dark filled the room. Someone was fumbling with a flashlight. The atmosphere shifted from tense silence to chaotic movement. Then, the unmistakable sound of a door slamming open echoed through the house. Were they being surrounded? Had reinforcements arrived? The darkness pressed in on Elijah, his breath ragged in his chest. He could feel the weight of Cassandra's arm in his grip, and for a brief moment, it was the only thing grounding him in the chaos. The sounds of footsteps stumbling in the dark, the low growls of men scrambling for their bearings. It was like a scene out of a nightmare. But this nightmare was real. "What's happening?" Elijah whispered, his voice barely audible over the noise. He couldn't see anything, just shadows, just the creeping, suffocating quiet that followed. "We've been set up," Cassandra said, her voice as calm and calculated as ever, despite the madness swirling around them. "They knew we'd try to escape through the back. They're waiting for us." Elijah's heart sank. He hadn't considered this. He hadn't considered that they'd been walking into a trap. He had trusted Cassandra, trusted her judgment, but now it seemed they had underestimated the forces coming after them. A light flickered in the corner of the room. It wasn't much, just a single beam in the distance, but it was enough to reveal the figures standing just beyond the shadows. Men, faces grim, eyes cold. They had been waiting. Elijah felt a surge of panic rise in his chest. "How do we get out of here?" He was searching the dark, scanning the walls for an exit, any way out, but there was none. The room was sealed tight. They were trapped. Cassandra's voice was steady as ever, but Elijah could hear the faintest edge of desperation in her tone. "We don't run, Elijah. Not anymore. This ends here." He looked at her, disbelief flooding his thoughts. "What do you mean? You're talking about fighting back, but they're too many. We don't have the resources for this." "Don't you see?" she said, stepping closer, her expression intense. "This is how it ends. We expose them. We take away their power. We fight." Before Elijah could respond, the light in the corner flickered again, this time brighter, illuminating the two men standing behind it. And then the unmistakable voice of Derek echoed through the room. "I must admit, Cassandra, I never thought it would come to this. But you've left me no choice." His voice was yet mocking, the satisfaction clear in his tone. "I warned you. Now it's over." Elijah felt his blood run cold. Derek. The one man who had been the shadow lurking in the back of all of this. The one who had been pulling the strings. He had underestimated how deep the betrayal ran. Derek wasn't just some middleman in this game. He was the mastermind. And now Cassandra was standing face to face with the very man who had orchestrated everything. "What do you want, Derek?" Cassandra's voice was a razor's edge. "You've got what you wanted. You've driven me into a corner. You've won. Now what?" Derek smirked, stepping further into the light, revealing his full figure. He looked calm, collected, Everything Cassandra had warned Elijah about. A man who had nothing to lose and everything to gain by destroying them. "I want what's mine," Derek said, his eyes gleaming. "And right now, that's you." Elijah could feel the weight of Derek's words hanging in the air like an iron chain. Cassandra stood still, her face unreadable, but Elijah could see the storm brewing in her eyes. She had been prepared for so much, but this was different. Derek stepped forward, his presence suffocating. "I had hoped you'd just walk away, Cassandra, but you never know when to quit, do you?" Cassandra didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence between them spoke volumes. But then, without warning, Elijah made his move. His hand darted for the gun Cassandra had given him earlier. His palms were slick with sweat, but he didn't hesitate. The men in the room didn't even see him coming. He fired once, the sound of the shot cracking through the air, echoing off the walls. The shot rang out. But before Elijah could even blink, one of the men behind Derek moved. The force of his body hitting the ground shook the air. The chaos had begun. But was this really the end of the game? Or was it just the beginning of something much darker? The shot had barely left Elijah's hand before chaos erupted in the room. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the confined space, but the immediate response was even louder. Shouts, scrambling feet, and the sharp crack of another weapon being drawn. Elijah's pulse raced as he turned, moving quickly toward the nearest window. But the moment he stepped into the light, he realized the gravity of their situation. They weren't just cornered, they were surrounded. Derek and his men hadn't just stumbled upon them by accident. This was calculated. "Get down!" Cassandra hissed, pulling him out of the way just as the first bullet whizzed past them. It embedded into the wall just inches from Elijah's head, sending a cloud of dust into the air. He barely had time to process the danger before they were on the move again. Cassandra's hand gripping his arm as she yanked him toward the back of the room. But it wasn't just the men outside the door. Elijah knew that Cassandra had been living in a world of deceit and betrayal for years, but now he realized the extent of it. Derek wasn't just some hired gun or bitter ex-business partner. He was the puppet master, the architect behind everything that had spiraled out of control. The family they had all been fighting for, Madeline and Lily, Cassandra's daughters, was just collateral damage in a game of power that had been going on for far too long. "Derek," Cassandra's voice came low and controlled. "This ends now." Her words were met with nothing but a hollow laugh, one that sent a chill through Elijah's spine. Derek stepped forward, casually moving as though the danger didn't concern him. He was the one who had orchestrated this, and now he was enjoying every second of it. "You still don't get it, do you, Cassandra?" Derek's voice was as cold as the walls surrounding them. "This game was never about the girls. It was about control, power. I was willing to let you think you could escape, but in the end, this is my world, and you're just a small piece in it." Elijah felt a growing rage, but there was no time for that. He needed to think. He needed to act. The tension was unbearable, his mind running through every scenario, every option, none of them ideal. His hand tightened around the gun. He wasn't about to let Derek win, not now. Suddenly, another voice pierced the air, this one soft, unfamiliar, but clear. "Derek." It was a woman's voice, and it was the last voice Elijah expected to hear. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" Elijah turned, confused. Cassandra's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. And there, standing at the far end of the room, was a woman. She was tall, with sharp features and an icy gaze, dressed in dark clothes that blended into the shadows. "Who are you?" Cassandra asked, her voice steady, though Elijah could hear the surprise in it. The woman took a step forward, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "I'm someone who's been watching you both for a long time," she said, a slight smirk tugging at her lips. "And I've come to finish what you started." Elijah's mind was racing. Who was she? Why was she here? And how did she know so much? The woman's presence was unnerving, as if she had been pulling the strings all along, quietly watching from the sidelines. Elijah could feel his gut tightening. This was bigger than he'd ever imagined. They weren't just fighting against Derek anymore. They were facing a much larger threat. "You're too late," Derek said, his eyes narrowing as he sized the woman up. "The game's already over. You're just another piece to be sacrificed." The woman's laugh was low, cold. "You still don't get it, Derek. You never did." Before anyone could react, the woman moved faster than anyone expected. She reached into her jacket, pulling out a sleek black device and slamming it onto the table in front of her. The room went dark. The sound of shifting machinery echoed through the darkness. Elijah's breath hitched. Were they being locked in? What was this woman doing? Was she an ally, or had they just walked straight into another trap? The darkness was suffocating. Elijah's chest tightened as his eyes strained against the black void. He could hear nothing but his own breath, rapid and shallow, and the frantic rustling of footsteps around him. The room had gone silent except for the low hum of machinery coming from the woman who had just activated something. A sharp click rang out, followed by a faint buzzing sound, and then, as if the world had been turned back on, a faint blue glow lit the room. Elijah's eyes adjusted and he could see again, just enough to make out the dark figures standing around him. Cassandra was still beside him, her body tense, her eyes scanning the room as she tried to make sense of what was happening. "What did you do?" Elijah asked, his voice low but filled with unease. He was still gripping the gun, but now with the lights back on, the reality of what he was facing hit him harder than ever. The woman, this mysterious figure, stood at the center of the room, her eyes gleaming with quiet power. She had triggered whatever mechanism, had just shut everything down, and now she seemed in control. "You really think it's over, don't you?" the woman said, her voice calm but with an unsettling edge. She moved toward Cassandra, every step purposeful, as if she were walking through the very heart of the storm they had just created. "I've been pulling the strings behind the scenes for far longer than you know. You two are just pawns in a much bigger game." Cassandra's eyes flashed with realization. "So you're the one," she said, her voice cutting through the tense air. "The one who's been working with Derek all along." The woman smiled coldly. "Not quite. Derek was never the mastermind. He was always just a tool, an easy one to manipulate. But me?" She glanced over her shoulder at Derek, who was still frozen in place, watching the exchange with a mix of disbelief and fury. "I'm the one who's been controlling the board from the shadows. I'm the one who made sure you never got out." Elijah's heart pounded. This was the last thing he expected. Cassandra had been right to be cautious, but this woman, this puppet master, had been lurking in the background all along, a true mastermind. Derek was nothing but a pawn in her game, and they had underestimated her. The woman's gaze flicked to Elijah. "And you? The mechanic? The father?" She sneered, her words dripping with disdain. "You think you're a hero? You're just another pawn too, but you don't even know it yet." Elijah's grip on the gun tightened, but he didn't fire. Not yet. He wasn't sure if he could take down the woman in front of him. But there was something in her eyes, something he hadn't seen in anyone else. It wasn't just power, it was a cold, calculated certainty. She knew she had already won. Cassandra took a step forward, her body poised with silent fury. "You're not going to get away with this," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, but with a force that Elijah could feel vibrating in the air. The woman tilted her head as if studying Cassandra for the first time. "Oh, I already have. This isn't about what I get away with, Cassandra. It's about what you lost. It's about what your family lost." The words struck deep. Elijah could see the flicker of anger in Cassandra's eyes, the same fire that had guided her through every trial they had faced. But now, in the face of this new enemy, the fire seemed different, more desperate. "You've lost everything. Cassandra," the woman continued, her voice almost soothing now, as if offering a twisted comfort. "Your empire, your daughters, everything you thought you could protect. It was all part of the plan." The blood drained from Elijah's face. This was no longer just about two girls and a fight for survival. This was about something bigger, something deeper. The woman hadn't just been playing a game with Cassandra. She had been playing with everyone involved, including Elijah. The depth of her manipulation was more than he could wrap his mind around. Suddenly, the woman snapped her fingers, and the door to the room burst open. More figures flooded in, more men, more enemies. The trap was tightening around them. Elijah felt the walls closing in, and in that moment, he knew. It wasn't just about the girls anymore. It was about surviving long enough to fight back. The room felt suffocating as more figures poured in, their silhouettes framed by the doorway like shadows waiting to engulf them. Elijah's heart hammered in his chest, each beat pounding louder than the last. The woman, this mastermind, had been playing them from the start, and now they were surrounded. No way out. No more room to run. Cassandra's eyes flicked toward the new arrivals, her face hardening like granite. "You're not getting away with this," she muttered, her voice like a quiet storm gathering strength. Elijah stood beside her, his gun still tight in his grip. He wasn't a fighter, never had been. He was just a dad, but now he was a man backed into a corner with everything on the line. His daughters, the twins, the future, they were depending on him. And he wouldn't let it end here, not like this. The woman in front of them, who had orchestrated every twist and turn in their lives, smiled like a predator eyeing its prey. "You think you can stop me?" she said, almost with amusement. "You're nothing but distractions in my plan. It was always going to be this way." She wasn't wrong. Elijah could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. This had been bigger than them from the start, but he wasn't about to let her win. "Cassandra," Elijah said, his voice hoarse, "what do we do now?" Cassandra didn't answer right away. She was studying the room, her eyes flicking between the men closing in on them and the woman, this queen of shadows, who had orchestrated everything. And then she turned to Elijah, her expression softening ever so slightly. "We fight," she said simply. "No more running." Before Elijah could respond, she stepped forward, pulling a small device from her jacket pocket. Elijah's eyes widened as she held it up. A small detonator. And then it clicked. She had been playing her own game this entire time, too. She had planned for this moment, for the final confrontation, knowing they wouldn't leave until this was over, and with a sharp press of the button, the lights flickered again, this time bright and blinding. The room went dark, and in that moment the air shifted. Panic rippled through the men. But in the darkness, Cassandra moved like a shadow, her every step calculated, like she knew exactly where to strike. A shout broke through the chaos, a command given too late. Elijah didn't hesitate. He moved toward the wall, taking cover, his instincts finally kicking in. As the light flickered back on, the room revealed its new reality. The enemies were down. The mastermind, the woman who had orchestrated this entire nightmare, was now on the ground, incapacitated, but alive. The gunfire had stopped. The fight was over, but the cost was clear. Elijah's breath came in ragged bursts as he looked at the woman, now lying on the ground, her face twisted in disbelief. She had underestimated Cassandra, underestimated him. Cassandra stood over her, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. "You thought you controlled everything," she said softly, her voice laced with something almost sorrowful. "But you never understood the strength of the people you were trying to break." Elijah looked at Cassandra, his heart heavy with the realization that this was it. They had won, but the victory felt hollow. There was no joy in it, only the echoes of everything they had sacrificed to get here. Elijah took a long, steadying breath, his hands still shaking. Cassandra turned to him, her expression softening for just a moment. She had won, but it wasn't just her victory. It was theirs. And though the fight was over, the scars would remain. "Is it finally over?" Elijah asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't be sure if the danger was truly gone or if it was just lying in wait for the next move. Cassandra gave him a small, sad smile. "For now," she said. "But the world we're stepping into, it's just beginning." The air in the room seemed to grow still. There were no more threats, no more enemies in the shadows. But Elijah knew this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about the future, the kind of world they could build after everything they'd been through. And as he glanced toward the girls, Madeline and Lily, his daughters, and Cassandra's family, Elijah knew there was hope after all. As they walked out of the room, a sudden sound echoed from the far hallway. A soft whisper, a voice Elijah recognized, but hadn't expected to hear again. "It's not over," the voice said, barely audible but unmistakable.